Okay, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be doing a second run on the recirculating mashing system that I built in this video here. And we're going to attempt to brew a porter on it. Alright, so it's almost winter and it's getting dark and gloomy and cold outside and depressing. So perfect time of the year to start brewing those nice roasty, hearty, warming dark beers that we love to drink while we sit inside during the winter. So today we're going to be making a porter. Probably going to turn out as a robust porter, but again, we're going to be trying to see how well the system works with a higher mash temperature. The last brew that I did, the Kveik Pale Ale, had a lower mash temperature that I had maintained during it. So today's porter is going to be somewhat of a medium ABV kind of beer, so hopefully it works out well. We're going to try and get a good amount of malt complexity in there and some nice English hops to kind of keep the nose interesting. Ideally, this is a very nice, refreshing, easy drinking, but enjoyable beer that doesn't taste like bread in a glass, but hopefully doesn't have the same amount of roastiness, intensity, alcohol, chocolate, coffee flavors that the stout does. We're looking for still a lot of those chocolate and coffee flavors, but in moderation and in balance. But I think most people can agree that porters are less intense in terms of the roast, the chocolate, the coffee types of flavors, etc., than a stout. So that's what we're going for today. I've already got a Russian Imperial Stout, so I don't need to duplicate that. We're going for something that can be ready to drink much quicker. So here we go on our recipe. We are going to be using 8.5 pounds of floor malted Maris Otter malt. Happened to find that at the homebrew store and I was very happy. Floor malting is the traditional way of making malted barley, and it tends to cost a little bit more. This might just be my perception, but I think there is consensus out there that floor malted barley makes a better beer than the non-floor malted malt. But either way, I'm still happy to pick it up. Higher quality malt generally always means higher quality beer, so hopefully this works out in our favor. So we're using 8.5 pounds of the floor malted Maris Otter, 2 pounds of Munich malt, 1.25 pounds of brown malt, which is kind of like a specialty porter malt, 1.25 pounds of medium crystal 60. We're doing 0.5 pound of flaked barley to add a little bit of mouthfeel, 0.5 pound of pale chocolate malt, 0.5 pound of roasted barley, and then 6 ounces of black patent. Hopefully we're going to keep our roasted flavors just present, but not super strong, without adding too much roasted barley, etc. in there. For hops, we're going to keep this at a medium bitterness. So I'm doing 2 ounces of Willamette at 60 minutes, but they are 2 different alpha acid percentages. In my case, I have one that's 4.2% and one that's 5.9%. If you do make this recipe yourself, you'll be fine just using 2 ounces of the same strength of Willamette. The difference in alpha acid values here isn't really that important for a low alpha hop like that. And 5 minutes, we're going to do 1 ounce of East Kent Goldings for aroma. So that gives us an estimated 36 IBUs, which should be enough to balance out the roast flavors and approximately 6-ish% ABV that we're getting from this porter. For water, we're going to want to make sure that we have a malty water profile. So I'm doing 82 parts per million of calcium, 11 parts per million of magnesium, 73 parts per million of sodium, 63 parts per million of sulfate, 100 parts per million of chloride, 148 parts per million of carbonate. And we're going to add 2 grams of gypsum, 2 grams of Epsom, 1 gram of baking soda, and 5 grams of calcium carbonate or chalk to the mash. I'm adding the baking soda because the amount of roasted malts in here will slightly tip the pH towards the acidic side in the mash, so we're going to want to make sure that we preemptively make it a bit more basic. We're going to mash higher, around 153 degrees for 90 minutes to emphasize having a full-bodied beer. So we're going to ferment this with a good old standby of Nottingham ale yeast. It's a great, clean, very flocculent strain of English ale yeast. Well, let's get to it. So I have had some people ask me about the volume of water. In this case, I'm using 9 gallons of water and I'm doing it at 161 degrees. Remember that for each individual system, there's a different strike temperature that's going to be required and a different volume of water depending on what your efficiency rates are and what kind of volume you're looking for at the end of the boil. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead and dough in now. So I'm going to let this sit for a little bit just so it can let the grain bed settle, and then we'll take a pH measurement, and then we'll actually start the recirculation process after that. So I'm going to let it sit for a bit first, and then we'll see how it goes. Okay, I've got a wort sample here for some pH strip testing. It's not the most precise method in the world, but it does get us in the ballpark, and until I can afford a real accurate pH meter, this is going to be the way it goes. So, kind of still looks like we're hanging out on the more acidic side of where we should be. Ideally, we want to hit 5.2. So I'm going to add another tablespoon of baking soda to the mash just to ensure that we have a proper pH. Okay, so we restarted the circulation, and as you can tell, the top temperature, the real temperature, is a little bit cooler because it was sitting while I actually doughed in, so it does have to catch up to the set value. But that's happening right now. As you can see, it's ramping up pretty fast. I've turned on the pump and the heat, and what's going on right now is a little bit of recirculation action here. So I've got my wort in here, coming out through the ball valve into this hot liquor tank here where it's being heated by my heat stick, coming back around, being pumped up, and now I have this nifty little sight glass here to see the actual quality of the wort. And that's coming back up here through the Blickman auto sparge, which will basically let out a little bit of wort as the volume in the kettle drops, and it'll shut it off if it gets back to a too high volume. So we're going to let this sit here for about 90 minutes to ensure a good thorough conversion. One of the best things about recirculation in the mash is that you get the cleanest, clearest wort possible. And just to show you how clean this wort is, you can see my finger through the sight glass very cleanly, very clearly. One of my favorite things. Having a pump and a plate chiller now, it's important that I don't clog things. So having clean wort is very critical and towards having a successful brew day. Okay, so we've hit 168 degrees, which is our mash out temperature. So now it's time to start collecting the first, and then of course following that, the second runnings in preparation for collecting all of the wort for the boil. So I'm actually going to do this a slightly different way than I did for the last brew. So we're going to go ahead and shut off this ball valve and turn off the pump, turn off the heat, and collect at least the first couple of gallons of our first runnings in this vessel here. So by doing it this way, I'm maximizing the clarity of the wort. So now, what I'm going to do is add some very hot sparge water here, and basically batch sparge. But now, because I've actually just disturbed the grain bed, I'm going to go ahead and start recirculating this again. The pump is going to turn on again, and we're going to recirculate this bit of wort here through and let it keep going until we have a clean, clear wort again for our second runnings, and we'll collect those and go ahead and then start the boil. So here the point is that we are going to be able to reach our pre-boil volume with the two series of runnings that we've drawn from the mash. So the first runnings came through, and that was the initial liquid that was in the mash tun, and that drained out to somewhere between like 6.5 to 8 gallons total. But we want a pre-boil volume of 8.25 gallons because we're going to have a lot left over in the kettle, and then we're also going to have a lot of boil off from the boil. So we want to reach that pre-boil volume with the highest gravity wort possible in order to retain efficiency. So therefore we will add all of the first runnings, and then we'll add some of the second runnings. The second runnings being the portion of the mash that was sparged. So we added some hot water to the mash, a couple gallons worth basically, to just kind of rinse off the residual sugars. So now we've collected both the first and the second runnings with probably somewhere around 10 gallons total. And we're going to go ahead and get rid of the grain that's in the mash tun right now, and then we'll go ahead and top up the mash tun and turn it into the boil kettle, since I only have a 2-vessel system. So our pre-boil OG is about 1034 at 120 degrees, which makes it with temperature correction about 1045. So about 4 points short of our target for pre-boil OG. All right, so we've just hit our boil and it's time for the 60-minute hop edition, which is the 2 ounces of Willamette. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get those set up now. All right, so we're gonna sit here for 55 minutes and wait for the boil to get to about 5 minutes left, and then that's our next thing. Okay, so it's now 5 minutes from the end of the boil, so it's time to add the last ounce of hops here. This is 1 ounce of East Kent Goldings. And we're also gonna add 2.5 teaspoons of yeast nutrient. Okay, now with 5 minutes left in the boil here, we're going to start by sanitizing our plate chiller here by recirculating the wort. Okay, so now pump is pumping boiling wort through these tubes to sanitize the inside of the plate chiller and the pump, because we're going to cool this off as rapidly as possible using this plate chiller, but in order to do so properly, we need to make sure everything is sanitized. It is the end of the boil, so I'm going to go ahead and shut off all the heat sources. Both the burner and the heat stick are now off. I'm going to turn on the cooling water. This is going to start hot runoff into my fermenter, which is full of sanitizer right now. So what we're going to do is basically use that first hot runoff to sanitize the entire fermenter so that we're prepared for receiving the wort. At the moment, the wort output is being recirculated into the actual boil here, which is obviously no longer boiling, and that is going to encourage a sort of whirlpool of sorts, so that any sort of trube and hop debris, grain matter, whatever else is left from the boil that'll be precipitated out is going to collect in the center, so that I'm able to collect clean, clear wort from the side, and again prevent clogging of the plate chiller. This is yet another reason why I use a hot bag to keep hop debris out of the plate chiller. So we're going to take the hops out right now, actually, and let those drain. Okay, so mistakes were made in terms of not paying attention to the volume of water in the fermenter. So ended up with some minor spillage on both the floor and my shirt. Cool right now. The word output is, oh shit. So we cleaned all that up. We've been recirculating the chilled wort coming out of the plate chiller back into the boil kettle, just so we can get a kind of a head start on the chilling process. But now it's the output of the wort being chilled is 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think we're going to be okay going ahead and chilling and going back into the fermenter. So I'm going to go ahead and dump out all of the sanitizer from the fermenter after I refresh my little bucket of sanitizer that I always have. Okay, so our original gravity is in, and it's a little disappointing. It's about 1.052. It really should be a lot higher, and I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, nonetheless, I didn't rehydrate this yeast. Kind of forgot to, so I'm just going to be a little over the top here and just use 2 full packets worth, just pitch right in. And that should get the job done. But anyway, it's a standard ale fermentation, so that means it's going to be fermenting at about 65 to 68 degrees for about 2 weeks, and we're going to keep it there and see how it goes. So my final gravity sample came in, and it's about 1024, which is really, really high. Okay, so time has finally come to actually taste the beer. As you saw in earlier clips, this did not quite go the way that I had planned it would. That is due to a number of things. I ended up having a very low starting gravity and a very high finishing gravity. So kind of a double whammy there, that kind of hurt, but didn't really ruin the beer overall. It's still quite a nice beer. It's just not even close to the strength that I was going for. It had some wonky attributes that I'll get into during the tasting. So the low starting gravity is a result of 2 things. First and foremost, a bad volume calculation. So I still haven't dialed that in completely yet for the new system. It looked like I had about 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons left of trub and liquid left over in the boil kettle after the boil. This means that my post-boil calculations that I used to calculate what I expected my OG would be were relying on a smaller volume of liquid than what was actually boiled. So as a result, I ended up with a slightly lower OG due to that, and also due to the fact that I used floor malted maris otter as my base malt versus regular maris otter. Doing a little more digging, I found out that floor malted malts are actually slightly less modified than your standard malts. So you get a slightly lower amount of sugar extract yield from floor malted malt than you do with regular stuff. I don't know exactly how significant that impact is, but I think it might be a contributing factor. The good news is it didn't really destroy the beer at all, just ended up making it slightly weaker, and I'm going to drive on with that. So definitely a good learning experience that I'm going to take with me going forward, especially with this new system. So I called it short porter, kind of a play on words in the porter. It is only 3.7% ABV, but at 36 IBUs. I ended up actually undercarbonating this intentionally. It is an English style. English styles are typically poured with a lot less carbonation. So I wanted to make sure that was under control. A lot of my other beers have been kind of over-carbonated. And another thing I did was not force carbonate it, but actually use priming sugar in the keg as you would with a bottle. And I dialed that back quite a bit so that we would just have a good kind of balanced level of carbonation in there. That's not too aggressive. So as you can see, it doesn't really have any sort of head retention. And it didn't pour with too much of a head, but it does have carbonation. It's not as much as I would have actually liked, so I think I kind of still underdid it. but that's okay. As far as the actual color of the beer goes, it's a dark brown, not a black beer. It's very murky, not clear, but just, you know, a good dark brown, but definitely noticeably brown, not black. As far as aroma goes, it has a very, very strong, pleasant, rounded chocolate note. It's just primarily dominated by chocolate, no roast detectable in the aroma. It smells kind of like baker's chocolate. It's not dark chocolate, it's just like a mildly dark chocolate. Kind of like almost got a biscuity base to it. So it smells like a cross between brownies and chocolate chip cookies. So it's actually a pretty pleasantly smelling beer. Yeah, I really do like the way it smells. All right, so next is body. So it's kind of like a medium heavy body. Definitely not as heavy as some other beers that I've made, and not as heavy as I actually would have preferred in the style. But in the flip side of this, it does have quite a high drinkability. So with the lower alcohol percentage in this, I think that does have an impact on the actual body of it versus what I had expected. That definitely does contribute, but at the same time, I was kind of expecting more body given the high finishing gravity and the amount of residual sugars. But yeah, it's very drinkable, goes down easy. It is not dry at all. It's very drinkable, it goes down easily, and it's good, it's nice. I don't think it's out of place, I just think I would have personally wished for a little bit more body, but at the same time it's pretty refreshing. And then flavor, of course. So the flavor is really, honestly, pretty good. It's not, like I said, I'm a little biased because I didn't get what I expected or wanted out of it, but it's still a pretty good beer. It has a really, really nice malty, biscuity, chocolatey flavor, and there's an aftertaste of roast. There's no acrid sharpness up front from the roasted malts. Those did not lend enough acridness to need, you know, an extended aging period. It just it comes in on the back as a nice roasty, very subtle background note, and it's only in the later stages of the flavor that the roast actually even shows up. And also, it's not overly sweet, which also surprised me. With all the residual sugars, again, I expected this to be a sweet, almost sickly sweet beer, but it's not. It's got enough balance in there. 36 IBUs of hops was enough to actually get this thing to balance out, despite the high finishing gravity. So that was a pleasant surprise. I mean, it's still definitely trends on the malty side of things, but it's not really sweet. So unfortunately, I am detecting a bit of a fruit ester, I think, from yeast. I think it's still a bit young. It does need a little time to settle out in the keg. So there's probably still some yeast in suspension that I'm tasting, but at the same time, those flavors are primarily created during fermentation as a result of temperature. And I do believe that I had not optimal temperature fermentation for this. So I fermented it a bit higher than it probably should have been. It was something like 68 to 70 degrees when I fermented this, and I think that might have been a little too high for Nottingham. Generally, dry yeast tend to have a little bit more tolerance in terms of how much ester they throw at those normal room temperatures, but I don't think it really had too much of an impact. It's noticeable if you look for it, but it's one of those things that might go away in time if we're lucky. The beer is still young, like I said, so I'm just rushing to get the video done. It's not creamy, it's just smooth. It is quite refreshing, actually. Very drinkable, very low strength, so you can have several pints of this in an evening and be totally fine. And it's really flavorful. It's not
your typical porter at all, but it's not a bad beer, I think. So overall, I'm probably going to give this like a 6, a healthy 6 out of 10. I think is fine. It's not my best work, and there's a lot of stuff that went wrong during the brew day that I could have corrected. And honestly, yes, if I had wanted to bump the ABV up at the end of the day, I could have thrown some sugar or some DME in or something, and added, more stuff to the fermentation to get more things out of this. But I really just don't think that I need to do that. It tastes fine the way it is. And at the end of the day, for me, at least in beers, the flavor is the more important part than the strength of it, although that is definitely a component to the overall beer's character. But at the end of the day, I can definitely say that this is a good beer. It's not a great beer, not an awesome beer. It's not a bad beer either at all, by any means. So solid, good for me out of this, and that's fine. So what would I improve going forward? Well, to be honest, I think I could still get away with using the floor malted maris otter. I think that is a good ingredient that does, and has in the past given me a lot more flavor, I think, than the standard maris otter, but that again is probably just my perception. But I'd still want to use it, I think. I don't think it's a big enough contributor to the OG problems that I had to actually make that big of a difference. But obviously we're gonna dial in those volume calculations much more finally next time. I'm gonna do a water test and find out just how much we have left once we're done, just to get that post-boil volume actually figured out, so that I can get more accurate calculations before the brews begin. And obviously, fermentation control is always something that, for those of us who don't ferment in a dedicated fermentation chamber, I only use my kegerator for lagers, because that's just, you kind of have to have that sort of setup for a lager to be controlled. But for ales, I typically do leave them out and then at the temperature that the room is in. And I set my house to be colder than normal during a fermentation so that I can ensure that it's decently in the right temperature range, but I did screw it up this time, and I think that did have an impact. So we'll definitely be making sure that I ferment this more along the lines of 65, I think. Probably would deliver a better, cleaner taste from the yeast. I think the last thing that would really improve this would be doing a step mash, like a dedicated step mash. So doing a decent amount of time as a protein rest, going towards the beta range and spending enough time in there to get a good extract, and then moving up towards the alpha and spending a lot of time there, making sure that we get a good, strong, full-bodied beer out of this, but still have enough extract from the grain to actually yield an appropriate amount of alcohol. So I think I'm going to try that with some of my future brews. Probably not the next one I have lined up, just because I'm not going to be mashing it at a higher temperature. I will still have alpha and beta active at the same time, given the mash temperature I'm going to use. But in the future, I think that is something I should do for beers that require a little more extra body and extract yield at the same time. So we're going to play around with some of those things. This system definitely needs some more fine tuning, and I'm definitely learning a lot as this goes along about my individual setup. And it does take a couple brews to really dial that in every single time you change equipment. I'm sure most of the guys out there already know that and have gone through similar experiences. But that's what really makes us better brewers at the end of the day, is getting to know our equipment and learning from each individual mistake, and keeping notes of these things and making sure you know what is causing what. So if you like the video and you like watching me do these things, please like, comment, and subscribe. All of these things really help my YouTube channel become more relevant to YouTube and that community as a whole, and lets me know that I'm doing a good job. I really appreciate all of the feedback you guys give me, and I like reading the comments and talking with all of you. So in the description box below, you'll find the recipe that I use for this beer. You may have to tweak that for your own individual system, and if you have it dialed in, you'll probably get better results than I did. And I've also included a list of all the equipment that I use as of filming this video. I've included links to Amazon as well, where you can buy those things for yourself if you do wish. If you do actually choose to buy something and click on one of those links, I will earn a very small commission, and it's at no additional cost to you, but it goes right into supporting this channel, and it does mean a lot to me if you can support the channel. So last but certainly not least, I try to upload a new video to YouTube every couple weeks or so, but more frequently you can find updates about my brewing life on Instagram. It is at The Apartment Brewer on Instagram, and I'll typically post there every couple days or so. You can see what kinds of brews are going on in real time, and you can actually know what's going to be coming to the YouTube channel eventually down the line, and it's a good way to stay informed. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'm going to go ahead and finish off this beer over the course of the evening, and I will catch you in the next one. So, cheers.